Recent US media report by the Washington Post that said they had access to files and information that indicated a hit team was hired by RAW officer to plot an attack on the Khalistani separatist Gurpatwat Singh Panu.
The Indian External Affairs spokesman has called these allegations made in the Washington Post article unsubstantiated and unwarranted.
It is hypocritical for Western governments to blame India because we know that the CIA has been keeping killing people on foreign soil forever. We know the Russians have been doing that. We know the Israelis have been doing that. So I don't think anybody in the world, not many countries in the world, have the moral right to also to make India feel bad about this.
In West Bengal, there continues to be flare-ups between the governor and the government. It's a very heated election there.
So Rahul Gandhi has chosen to contest from Rae Barelli instead of Amethi. There is a lot of conversation about how he's, walked away from a contest.
There is too much noise around it. But again, here's another place where the opposition continues to be less strategic. Hi, and welcome to episode 14 of the India Dialogue. We're so happy that you're here listening to us. My name is Ruchir. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Mitali and Manu. Mitali is the Director of Journalism at the Reuters Institute and an author who has a book coming up soon, Crypto Crimes. And Manu is an advocate and a lawyer and a spokesperson for DMK. I am Ruchir. I am the CEO at Distributed Energy and chair at the School of Policy and Governance. We are getting close to phase 3 of the election in India. We're talking about issues that matter in this election and otherwise. We've spent the last 13 episodes in the build-up to the election covering a range of issues. And we are here because we care about India and we want to unpack issues in a meaningful, sensible way. Today, we're going to try something different. We're going to focus on one topic and then try and cover multiple stories from the election. So on the first topic, Mitali will take us through. Mitali.
Thank you, Ruchir. I think this one is, it stands out because of the ripples that it sent down, not just across India, but foreign policy waves. Just to recap for people who may be catching up on this story, there was a recent US media report by a very large newspaper called the Washington Post that said they had access to files and information that indicated a hit team was hired by a research and analysis wing. We tend to refer to the acronym RAW officer to plot an attack on the Khalistani separatist Gurpatwat Singh Panu, always mostly referred to as Panu. That report also seems to indicate, and I think this is the troubling bit, that Western intelligence agencies believed the then RAW chief, Samant Goyal, actually approved the plot. And just to take a couple of steps back, when this story had first come out, there were indications from US intelligence agencies that this was an operation that targeted Panu, but also had been not just approved by the RAW chief, but at very, very high intelligence levels, going right up to the National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, and the fact that he was also aware of this particular attempt to kill Panu, a US citizen, on US soil. At that point, there were very, very serious rebuttals from the Indian government saying this wasn't the case at all. I think what has made people a bit uncomfortable is the tone of the response that has come in this time round from the government, saying it's not useful to indulge in these sort of accusations, but it's not a no. And I think the reason this is really important is, first of all, for any other sovereign country, it is hugely, I think, distasteful and problematic to see this kind of attack happen on their own soil. And the bigger question is, where does this leave India in terms of its relations with other countries, and what sort of light does this put India in relation to those countries? So let me lob it first at Manu. I know we've had so many conversations about foreign policy, a much more aggressive foreign policy stance, Manu, by India, but this one is a tricky one.
Yeah, and it is tricky. It is problematic, and it is deeply concerning on some level. So let's try to unpack this from a domestic angle first, right? So, what is this extrajudicial killing concept? And in Indian domestic legal parlance, this is what is known as encounter killing. So let's start with that, right? Recent article published, not recent, sorry, almost 6 8 months ago, an article published in the Frontline magazine quoted a fact checker article published in the Scroll digital news outlet to say that India recorded almost 810 encounter killings from 2016 to 2022. So 6 years prior to that, 800. So roughly, 120, 30 encounter killings. So these are extrajudicial killings, often by, I mean, not often, almost always by state support, either by the police or by the armed forces, and to do it beyond the scope of judicial proceedings. So of course this doesn't take into account all the sort of the death sentences handed out in court. So naturally these are um, encounters by the police, which are on cases which are under investigation, yet to begin investigation, or at best case scenario under trial, right? Now this is something that we've taken, not for granted, but perhaps we've sort of accepted it as some part of what policing or criminal law deterrence in India must now involve. And this is, I think, where the problem in some sense has been normalized. And therefore, when you expand this to other territories, so the territories outside India, and you have agencies like the research and analysis wing, amongst others, where they have very specific targets. And now recently we heard about, well, not we heard about, the Canadian Prime Minister informed to us and the rest of the world about their deep suspicion that Indian agents, Indian government agents, were involved in the killing of Nijar, a person, a Canadian citizen, and the issue being that this happened on Canadian soil. Now, after which we've now had Panoon, and I think even before all of this, in 2020, if I recall correctly, the Australian government had deported some Indian spies on the basis that they were not to do with extrajudicial killings, but definitely as part of sort of some work in that line. Now, what I think India must realize is there are, of course, a lot number of extrajudicial killings where Indian hand has been suspected in territories such as Pakistan. Now, Pakistan, according to the Indian government today, is not a friendly country, so therefore they may not have much of a problem in claiming those. But when it comes to countries such as the United States or Canada or any other friendly countries, this becomes a problem or a thorn in the side of the relationship. So how do they handle this diplomatically is very important. Now, with regard to the Canadian case, there was actually a lot of diplomatic pushback. If you remember, the diplomatic relations strained quite a bit. India had suspended visa operations for a while. India had, I think, gone as far as asking Canada to downsize its diplomatic corps in Delhi. So they had to, quickly send back Canadian diplomats based in New Delhi, and there was sort of a pushback from the Canadian side, and so on and so forth. Now, that was what happened, and of course, I think there was never any clear sort of public, I think, addressing of this particular issue. Now, when the American issue around Panoon came about, and there was quite a bit of evidence that was gathered and made its way into public domain, India had acknowledged that it would set up a high level committee or some sort of a committee to look into the concerns expressed by the United States authorities. Now, we do not know what has happened, and of course, now this is back in news because of the Washington Post article. Now, in this case, again, yesterday or a couple of days ago, the Indian external affairs spokesman has called these allegations made in the Washington Post article unsubstantiated and unwarranted, right? Now, but there has been no clear categoric denial, according to me, that this had nothing to do with India, nor is this Indian policy. So therefore, this is sort of, I guess you could say that this is how diplomacy is played out, right? Lots of times in gray areas, lots of times through back channels, and so on and so forth. And I think we are all, I think we can understand why that is the case. But there is, I think, some level of, I think, Indian tacit admission that some of this could be attributed to us. But how do we do it? How do we handle this, given that these are countries who are now regarded as close allies of India? So I think there has been no clear diplomatic sort of clarity or diplomatic sort of approach on how this is going to be handled going forward, as we see these allegations start stacking up. Now, interestingly, it is in this context that there is another sort of parallel proceeding that is taking place in the United Nations. This week, I believe, or the week that is coming straight after, India's National Human Rights Commission, which is the premier human rights agency, is now going to have a review of its accreditation. Now, the United Nations provides two levels of accreditation, A category and B category. And India has, over the last 20 odd years, been in the A category. By India, I mean the National Human Rights Commission. Now, this week, I mean, not only with regard to these extraterritorial sort of killings and so on, even based on other issues, our own National Human Rights Agency Commission has actually undergoing a serious review of whether they make the cut to be the top human rights body or not. And there's a lot of, I think, problem that, according to me, builds from the domestic level, right? Even our own domestic human rights priorities, our domestic human rights sort of monitoring is not up to scratch. And all of this, points very clearly to a government which does not want to answer these uncomfortable questions. And why is this a problem? Because the National Human Rights Commission was especially set up to ensure that there is some check and balance, to make sure that the government is held accountable. But what has happened? Why is the National Human Rights Commission now undergoing this accreditation review? Is because you have a retired Supreme Court Justice Arun Kumar Mishra, who during his time on the Supreme Court bench came under a lot of scrutiny, under a lot of fire. In fact, four senior most judges of the Supreme Court then, as they were, actually had like a little bit of a press conference. Some may say it's a bit of a mutiny against the Chief Justice of India, because Arun Kumar Mishra, being related to the then Chief Justice of India, Deepak Mishra, was allotted, though he was number 10 or 11 in the hierarchy, was allotted all the sensitive, important matters which, his hierarchy otherwise would not have let him. So Arun Kumar Mishra came to be seen as someone who is very pro-government in many cases. Quite controversially, cases including Sanjeev Bhatt, the IPS officer, Judge Loya murder case, cases to do where government had a huge sort of say or influence. Many such cases went straightly to Arun Kumar Mishra's roster, and he, more often than not, has been accused of siding with the government and being pretty much pro-executive, pro-government. And after retirement, Justice Arun Kumar Mishra, was immediately appointed the chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission. So you can see, the very purpose of having a senior member of the judiciary heading the commission was itself defeated by having someone who has been facing accusations of being extremely pro-government. So what I'm trying to say is, see, this is not something that only India must answer outside India, right? And of course, there's this whole problematic categorization of these are Khalistani terrorists. So therefore, what's wrong in if a few of them are sort of done away with? But that's not the problem here. The problem is the process, right? There is a process of law. Now, what I'm trying to say is, if not in India, where you've given a sort of a go by to many of these processes by through encounter killings and other things, at least when you in other countries they are taken much more seriously. And when you get into the soil of another country and there is an allegation such as this, I think it puts the entire credibility of India as a country where there is a constitutional morality, where there is a rule of law, a government which follows the rule of law. And that entire question is very important. And I've not seen government provide a convincing answer to the rest of the world, let alone the citizens of the country, on these issues.
Ruchi, you want to come in on that because, as Manu was pointing out, to have sort of these extrajudicial killings within your own country is problematic in any case, but it is deeply offensive when it happens on the soil of another country. And interestingly, amongst this whole mix, there is now mention of Australia, which traditionally has had great ties with India, but is now sort of needing to say, look, we uphold our democratic values on the basis of reports that there was apparently a nest of spies, and that's the term that's been used on Australian soil, spying on persons of Indian origin. So this is sort of, it's having not a catalytic effect, but it's certainly popping up in more places than where it started.
Before I answer, I want to say I'm against extrajudicial killings. I'm against. It is going to be slightly controversial. So I'm just putting the disclaimers out. I love India as a peace-loving country, and I'd much rather that none of this happened. I think the lens one has to look at this from also. I thought Manu's answer was really interesting because I had never considered the domestic view and how that justifies the foreign actions. I had never even considered that. I read this story from Ajit Doval about Ajit Doval always saying India's position should be offensive defense, and that sort of made that answered or helped me understand some of these actions in the last few months. The lens that I want to look at this from is one that is relative to actions of other intelligence agencies and the failure of the diplomatic route. For me, I am assuming and imagining that the Indian diplomats have tried to raise concerns with these respective governments about people talking about separating, say, Khalistan from India, or obviously the Pakistan terrorist cells and so on. And because that has failed, intelligence has stepped in to take the measures they have. And obviously, like killing anyone I personally have a problem with killing anyone, but the fact that they have chosen to take this path for me is a reflection of how India feels about itself in the international stage. Part of it is obviously a lot of these countries want to have India as a friend, as a counterbalance to China, and given the circumstances that changed there in the last few years between India and China, it sort of created room for the natural alliance, and as a result, and the Washington Post article also pointed this out, that as a result, the U.S. government in that case has gone light on linking the person who was hired with the Indian government. So I think this is about as much about India sort of taking a measure of last resort, in my mind, to stop overseas movements around separatism, as much as it is about, and it is about India basically taking, believing that it can get away with murder quite literally. Um, I don't as I believe it's not forgivable, but I also don't think it. I also think it is hypocritical for Western governments to blame India because we know that the CIA has been keeping killing people on foreign soil forever. We know the Russians have been doing that. We know the Israelis have been doing that. So I don't think anybody in the world, not many countries in the world, have the moral right to also put to make India feel bad about this. That's where my mind is on this issue.
I think a couple of things that I think you've touched upon, which are fantastic, because I think that's really where we need to also address this conversation. And you're right. I think it's not about international government, foreign governments, or people living in other parts of the world, right? I think this needs to be something that must be essentially part of domestic discourse, because this is the government that represents us. What are the values that they want to represent, and is this something that we want them to do, right? Whoever the person may be. The most sort of infamous sort of person to have sort of run a terrorist operation in India. So I think after the Mumbai attacks, even the terrorists from that operation were given a trial. Whether that was a fair trial in every sense of the word is a matter of debate. But I think we are a country which needs to follow some rule of law, and that must apply to every single entity, organization, government, or otherwise. So I think that is the yardstick we must all use and question our government. Yeah, it's true. I don't think we don't need today the Americans or the British or the Australians or anybody else to lecture us on morals or international human rights or any such thing. But I think it is what we expect and must demand from our own government, our own government authorities, and so on. The second part of this, again, another interesting issue that Ruchir brought up is around separatism, right? Which is, of course, a lot of the, at least Panun and Nijar, are all sort of tied by the common thread of Khalistani separatism, and so on and so forth. Now, again, I think that is where we must question our own understanding about the the stability of Indian nationhood, right? How secure are we as citizens, as our governments, that the Indian nationhood is secure? Or are we worried that movements essentially in other parts of the world have such an impact so as to destabilize our nationhood? Now, if that is the case and that is what is happening, I have not seen enough evidence to see that, right? There is always going to be, I think, people, whether in diaspora or in other parts of the world, who will have these notions of a separate country, and that is something that has been there right from the very earliest of days, since Indian independence. But we've not seen over the last few decades, at least, these movements really take root. I think by and large, many of the early sort of separatist movements within Indian soil have actually changed into or transposed into more strong federalist movements. At least in Tamil Nadu, I can tell you, when the around the time of independence, there was a real push to see whether there could be a separate sort of country in the south, with three or four of the southern states. But in 1960-61, when the Indo-China War began, or when it was happening, there was a push, and all when push came to shove, all these organizations which earlier had supported separatism had said, no, we will no longer want that. We are now part of this country, and we want is greater sort of federalism or autonomy. So at least over the last 50 years, in the south, from a very pro separatist position, a lot of the organizations have now taken a very, very different position. So again, how secure are we in this idea of Indian nationhood? Are we so worried that somebody working out of a Canadian town, some organization based in the UK or in the United States or any other part, has the potential impact of destabilizing? I mean, I guess both of you live overseas now, so I'd love to hear more about this. But I have not seen any evidence of them being able to do enough within India that a government should be so worried so as to go and eliminate someone.
Yeah, I just want to add to that point that Manu's making, Ruchir, and to the ones that you did as well about moral currency. And I agree, moral currency is a very gray zone now. I mean, even in this particular incident, the US government has admitted, and documents seem to indicate that it was aware of this, as far back as 2122, but yet chose to engage in dialogue with India, conducted conversations around potential deals, agreements. Conversations and dialogues were essentially open and remained quite cordial from the looks of it over the last year and a half. I think Manu raises an important point about just scratching the surface on the why. Why does a country like India feel the need to do this? Is there a political instinct that is now sort of incentivizing aggression and incentivizing, taking this sort of approach when dealing with someone you see as an enemy, quote unquote? Is it a reaction to the fact that when the 22-21 farmers protest happened in, across a large part of India, but was sort of seen as and was narrowed down to the view of, only Punjab has a problem with this? Is it that the government felt there was some kind of influence that was happening, from abroad or from within, and that needed to be stymied because it sat close to this talk of a Khalistani movement? Um, is it that, and I agree with Manu, is it that, in your zeal to be so aggressive, you are actually coming across as an insecure nation where you see individual one or two or three, or organization one or two or three, as quite damaging to your own prospects? And I think it's an interesting point in time for India, because it's, one is, of course, the sort of international reputation that you construct for yourself by the way you conduct yourself as a nation. There is a reason Pakistan has a certain reputation, and there is a reason people are concerned about the kind of elections that they have there and the undue influence of the military in Pakistan. We are not them, and that's what we should hold on to. But also in an environment where increasingly there is a lot of debate about whether India remains a robust democracy, what sort of form and shape democracy has taken in India. I think it's important to, be clear about how you'd like to identify yourself. Are you going down the road where everything's game? um, I think that's a bigger question, for people to sort of, even as you say, that's the way you treat somebody, and if you don't get your way, just shoot them down. Then there remain fewer and fewer lines of difference between us and nations that we may see as sort of repressive in nature, and nations that we see that don't have a rule of law. And I think that's a bigger question to be asking. Richard,
I
you want to?
think, yeah, I think the problem in especially security is like the three of us or anyone who is not in the inner circle, we don't see everything. And sometimes I imagine that they have information we don't, and as a result, they make calls that normally may not be made. And the thing, as much a pacifist as I am, the problem I find is others are not, and so one gets stuck in situations where you can't always be holding the moral high ground and not taking such action. So that's the piece. I don't even know where to begin in terms of thinking about, because I imagine that these guys are thinking a lot about that. The second piece I want to say is on separatism. I think that's an excellent point. I think the thing that they're worried about, my guess, is that some of these movements, like in Canada, where they are a lot more active, they get more attention of the media. And we all know how much of a hold the Western media narrative has on places like ours. So I think my guess is that the offensive defense, to use Ajit Doval's word, is taking place here primarily because if it does pick up in the local media there, sort of starts influencing where our mind is. The last comment I want to make is on terrorism, and I think especially around the border, and I don't believe right now Pakistan is in a position to actually. I hope they're not in a position to do anything crazy in India. But the thing, my suspicion that the reduction in the amount of attacks on Indian soil is partly because of some of these actions that they've been taking on Pakistani soil. And I genuinely don't know what the right answer there is, basically.
I just want to quickly say though, Ruchir, part of this is it's a narrowing of the discussion to a point where you are sort of simply looking the other way from very large developments. I mean, on this offensive defensive point, you shot someone you thought was a suspect, terror movement organizer down in foreign soil. Great. When is the last time Ajit Doval or the defense minister or the government had a conversation about what's happening with China? I mean, I'm sorry, I have seen neither offense nor defense there. So it's sort of like, picking up a subject and then just pushing it in one direction, whereas what we need to do is have much greater accountability on this point about security, and say, can someone update us on what's happening with our borders? What's happening with this process of salami slicing? Can someone tell us why there is a civil war like situation in Manipur? You're right, so the whole conversation gets led away by this one incident because it has a sexy nature to it, right? It does. It kind of can appeal to different sides of the argument. As you say, people can say, it's for the greater good. People can say this is what intelligence agencies are all about. But the real sort of meat and bones conversations of, what is actually happening in our borders, I feel is just sorely missing. I just wanted to say that.
Shall we move on to that next topic? Because I think, though it's important for us to sort of understand the global order around these things, we do, I think, find ourselves in the middle of a very, very interesting election. As the phases sort of go forth, we see, a lot of different developments, right? I think something that was not even an issue at the start of the election is now a huge sexual allegation scandal against a sitting member of parliament from the JDS in Karnataka, which happens to be in the BJP led National Democratic Alliance. The Karnataka elections to that constituency was completed last month, and the candidate who stood in the election happens to be the grandson of the former Prime Minister Devagowda and the nephew of a former Chief Minister of Karnataka, Kumarasamy. And these sort of allegations are now sort of dominated some part of the media, if not the entire mainstream media, over the last 4 or 5 days. So that's one particular piece. Whereas on the other hand, further up north in Delhi, you have Supreme Court looking still very closely at what should happen to Arvind Kejriwal. In a few days, the Supreme Court will again examine whether the sitting Delhi Chief Minister must be released on some sort of interim bail, considering these elections, but also considering that you know he is the leader of a government and elected leader of a government, and so on and so forth. Again, moving east, first in West Bengal, there continues to be flare-ups between the governor and the government. It's a very heated election there, serious allegations, serious counter allegations, and so on. And all the way to Manipur, where there has been quite I think hard to dispute allegations of rigging and complete sort of breakdown of trust in the election machinery. So I've just put a few different points, but what I want to hear first from maybe Mitali is sort of your assessment of how the election is progressing, whether it is picking up new issues, or is it still very much the old trend? I think pretty much the most recent development within the Congress party is that Mr. Rahul Gandhi will contest in Rae Barelli, where his mother Sonia Gandhi was the a member of parliament from last time, which means he will now contest in two seats, Wayanad in Kerala and Rae Bareli in Uttar Pradesh. So, maybe you want to sort of give us a wrap up, but also feel free to deep dive into any of these issues, Mitali.
Yeah, thanks, Manu. On Rai Bareli, I don't have sort of a very detailed opinion, just that it is quite incredible how much time and attention it takes up. And, again, I go back to my pet topic of what it is the media chooses to focus on. So Rahul Gandhi has chosen to contest from Rae Bareli instead of Amethi. There is a lot of conversation about how he's, walked away from a contest, even though he's been telling his party members, "Daro mat, don't be afraid." But he's sort of taken an easy way out by going to Rae Bareli instead of Amethi. I think, honestly speaking, there's more than 500 seats to look at. What one person does with one seat and the outcomes really don't determine what happens with the entire elections. Uttar Pradesh is hugely important. You can't ignore it. There's 80 seats over there, so you have to be showing presence. But what someone chooses to do versus one and the other, I feel, this is my opinion, is not sort of top of priority as it seems to be for the media. There's two things that really have me quite disturbed, actually, Manu, on this whole election campaigning and what happens with the next phase. The first is Prajwal Revanna, and I know that that's sort of an evolving story. As I understand it today, I think there are lookout notices against his father because he hasn't shown up for, where he was called in for a special investigation inquiry. He didn't show up, which means that there's now a lookout notice against him. um, it will take the course it will take. I know that he has been sort of suspended from the party, and that there was huge party pressure. As I understand it, it was deeply embarrassing for party members to be going out and interacting with the public. So public anger, remains around it. First of all, I have a problem with this trivializing in how it's being reported as a sex scandal. I mean, 3,000 videos of assaulting women and raping women is not a scandal. It is assault. Uh, First of all, I doff my hat to these women. I am in a country that is so, deeply patriarchal. It is not easy to come out and talk about sexual assault because most of the time there's more shame that's sort of put on the woman rather than the perpetrator. And the other one, from the south, just sort of pulling that string up north, is with Brij Bhushan, where he is also accused of sexual assault, is not contesting, but in place of him, there's a family member. In an environment where there's so much conversation about the government has done so much for women, beti bachao, beti padhao, labharthi, so many schemes for women, you still come down to the very sort of base level of how are we treating 50% of our population. What is the currency that they have, social or political, to just ensure the very basics? And guess what, these are the very basics to feel safe while doing your work, to feel safe where you live, because these cases that we're talking about involve domestic workers, they involve sort of people working at the panchayat level. It's just women trying to do their job. And in some cases, like with Brij Bhushan, it's women going out and winning Olympic medals for the country. What does it take to just ensure that women are safe? And these are people in positions of extreme political power. That's what really disturbs me. And the second one, I don't know if you caught it, is a couple of days back on the BJP's official handle on Instagram, there was an animated video that was shared that essentially really doubled down on the whole anti Muslim narrative. It sort of had pictures of Indian gods and goddesses, depicted the Muslims as Muslim invaders, very graphic imagery involved over there, and continually going back to the same point of these guys are cornering your wealth, this community is a problem, uh, Congress is going to support this community, you need to protect your space. So I'm just wondering if there's have they picked up that in the first two phases whatever they were trying was not
Did you
working?
find this level of narrative, targeting Muslims or minorities in 2019? Are you saying it's increased or it's the same, or are you saying this is like an old trick?
I would say it's evolved, Manu. I think between 2019 to now, what we have is this complete explosion in terms of AI. What we have is this explosion in terms of, access to using social media even more creatively if you want to use it. I didn't see these many fictional ads as you now see on platforms like X, where it's very much about demonizing one community versus the other. I don't recall seeing this much sort of use of imagery and technology. I may be wrong, but the sort of the line of argument is the same. It still remains, this community is bad, we're here to fix it, and we're here to keep you safe. I just find it really, I find it really debasing, in the sense that I read an article a couple of days back saying the IMF projects India to be the fourth largest economy, and this is going to happen sooner than was predicted. So I'm wondering, when you have so many fantastic economic wins to talk about, should you not be talking about it? Is it that you are not confident that they are actually economic wins, or is it that you
Fear
don't think that's
sells.
working?
You know, more than self appreciation does, right? I mean, maybe is it just
Yeah.
the oldest sort of political thinking in the book that keep people scared, keep them on tenterhooks. But Richard, do you want to come in on that, or add to Mitali's sort of concerns, or talk about your own sort of perspectives on which way the election is sort of now heading?
I don't know if you feel this way. All of my conversations recently, the narrative has gone from, oh, the 400, 400 par, 400 cross, to, oh, will they do 270 to 280? It's quite interesting. Like, the thing about having a seven phase election is, it seems to me anecdotally, I can't tell about the actual polls because I haven't looked at them. Anecdotally, it feels like BJP doesn't quite have the grip, or it's not as given as it felt a little while ago. I think on the communalism point, one of the things, I also think it's about like which phase of the election are we in, and I think phase three is like a lot of northern Karnataka. It's a fair bit of like Madhya Pradesh. It's a big chunk of Gujarat. I think there's a little bit like there in some of these regions, there is a little bit of a hangover in the older constituents about the communalism. And I have a feeling that this is about timing as more than a lot of other things around why they're releasing or talking about Muslims now. The Devegowda's grandson issue is just depressing. And I say Devegowda's grandson and not his name because I think this is about power. This is about the fact that these people, the son and the grandson, have inherited so much power that they've just felt above the law. I can't imagine that women haven't come forward before. I'm 100% that they must have. It's just that it's become a thing now. That part is depressing, and I like even now I'm 100% that there are candidates where some of these allegations have not come out, and we have more than just these two people who we should be worried about being in the parliament. It is really depressing.
Very true, and I think that point about impunity, and authority is well made. There has actually been a couple of legal, developments in this regard, right? So, looking at this as sheer sexual assault, sexual harassment. In India brought in the Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace law in 2012. Right now, again,
Yeah.
I'm just going back to being very lawyery on this point, but bear with me for 1 minute. The idea is that a lot of these instances of sexual assault, sexual harassment happens when there is a authority, right? When there is a person who's the manager, or someone who's very senior, or a position of authority. So this law was brought in. Now, this law has never been applied to political parties. So what the law says, let me explain first. It says if you have more than 10 persons in your organization, you must have a complaints committee. And then that will help you. That will be the first port of call for a person to lodge a complaint, and so on and so forth, right? Before they go to a police authority or an external authority. But this particular law has never been applied to political parties which have easily more than 10 persons. And in fact, there is a judgment of the Kerala High Court because somebody had filed a public interest litigation saying, please direct these political parties to institute internal complaints committee. And when this case came about, the Kerala High Court, which included the then Chief Justice of the Kerala High Court, passed a judgment saying this will not apply to political parties, right? I think it was not a very well known judgment, but the damage was done there, right? And this was about a year or two ago. Not that political parties were coming forth or coming forward to set up these committees anyway or do any sort of internal sensitization around sexual harassment, but now there is a clear sort of judgment, a clear sort of directive in law which says that political parties don't need to even set up or need to be part of the sexual harassment law. So again, I'm just saying this from a legal perspective, but within parties where there is a great, can I say, potential for such sexual exploitation or sexual harassment or sexual assault, this is not even done. About other organizations, I don't know, or other sort of in a corporate setting, how well this is followed, I can't quite tell. But definitely from a place where you see a lot of authority, misuse of authority, this is definitely not done. Mitali, did you want to come in on
No,
that?
I just wanted to no, I wanted to ask you actually, and it's sort of a switch from the point you were making, Manu, because you raise an important point about what differences are we seeing between 2019 and now. And you were
Hmm.
on ground, in 2019, you were supporting, a party candidate through her campaigning. And I came across an interesting article where one of the on ground reporters said this year round, what she's finding really challenging is separating the voter from the narrative. So when she tries to have conversations with citizens, it's a lot about, Modi ji has done this and Modi ji has done that, and he always thinks about the welfare of women and farmers, and but it's tough to understand whether that's what the voter believes, or that is sort of sharing the narrative but having a private belief. Are you seeing changes between 2019 and now?
Well, I must sort of preface this with two things. Right? One, because I work within a political
Yes,
party
Manu.
ecosystem, and two, because what I must tell you is that Tamil Nadu is the most unfavorable state for Modi. So all throughout the last 12 years, 10, 15 years, whenever they've pulled Narendra Modi versus Rahul Gandhi, Tamil Nadu is the only state which is where Rahul Gandhi has trumped Modi 3:1 on average, right? So Tamil Nadu is the state where Rahul Gandhi is most popular in all states in country. This is a fact. This is done across all surveys, internal party, external, and so on. So the Narendra Modi factor is very less. Even here locally too, they don't overplay it. Also because there's a huge barrier for Mr. Modi when he comes and speaks. He speaks in Hindi. It has to be translated. There's a lot lost in translation. So therefore, the narrative that the BJP, the Narendra Modi government does is very little. Here, it is a lot about attacking the DMK. That is the BJP plan. That is in place. The most sort of I think their favorite mode of attack is to say DMK is anti-Hindu. They will. So it's a slight variation on what they do in the rest of the country, but here they say if DMK comes, they'll shut down your temples. There will be no Hindu religion. They will make sure that all the temple funds are taken out and given to other things, and so on and so forth. So that is more their play, which I don't think people have ever believed here. Now, across the country, though, what I do get from people who are working on the ground is that there is a sense that, yes, there is a little bit of this blind faith. This is what he has done, this is what the man has said, so we must believe him, and so on and so forth. But I see some of this slowly being questioned. I see people, every 5 years. It's amazing that we have an election once in 5 years, right? Because the amount of new people, new voters that come in that 5 years is tremendous, right? And every new, like say so the people who are voting in 2024 for the first time would have been born in 2004 of, I mean, so they would, 2004, 5 and 6, right? So these are all people who, again, their perspective is so different, right? And I think with every era, like every new block, chunk or cohort of voters that come in, they sort of question what the earlier election voters took for granted. If the 2019 voters, for example, took for granted that Mr. Modi has done everything correct, or if the 2014 voters took for granted that the Gujarat model is the best development model in the country, right? 2024 voters are happy to question that. They don't just take it for granted. So with each election, I've seen that narrative also be questioned, whatever it is that is played out earlier. So that's my own one observation, not only from this election, but having seen multiple elections and how each new wave of voters come in, you can't take them for granted. They will question everything that you were able to sell the earlier cohort. So you must restart. You must sort of have something new, some like new product to sell them in that sense. Does that make sense, Mitali?
It does. I feel a sense of sort of there's low level panic when I hear someone born in 2004 is voting now. I feel very old, but that's what it is, right?
Exactly. It's to put a cricket analogy. The 2004 born person has never, like, probably seen Saurav Ganguly play or lead India, right? Because they're sort of the Dhoni and Virat Kohli generation. So if you go and tell them, have a conversation with them about, no, Sachin Tendulkar was the best Indian cricketer, they have they have no idea. So again, that's the point I'm trying to make. Richard, did you want to step in on the last point and then take us through to the next section?
Um, I mean, in the differences, I don't have much to add. One thing I do think, the Rae Barelli and Amethi thing, I wanted to comment. I am actually, it is disappointing that Congress or the opposition is not more strategic. And I think the way I think about that is a reflection of the 2024 state of our elections, which is that I don't know if BJP, as good as how, like, the lack of opposition or lack of coherent opposition strategy. I think the reason why the party in power is likely to win, let's see how the numbers pan out, is primarily because here is another example of lack of organizing. I mean, we knew Smriti Irani will run for Amethi again. How do these tickets actually hurt BJP in what they would consider to be, Congress would consider to be their own. So that's the point I wanted to make. That yes, there is too much noise around it, but again, here's another place where the opposition continues to be less strategic, and we need a stronger opposition. Anyway, shall we move to Aapne Sunaa Kya? Have you heard? Uh, Mitali, do you want to go through Have You Heard first?
Oh, shall I? Okay, I can. I have a show and tell for my Have You Heard? It's also, we're recording on World Press Freedom Day, which is it's a grim day, guys, not just for India, but for many parts of the world. And what I wanted to share was this book that I'm going to now dive into, which is Knife by Salman Rushdie. I'm sure everyone read and saw the very very terrible and tragic attack that happened to him in New York, where he was stabbed multiple times. And I was just reading a little bit about how life has been since then. He's obviously lost sight in one eye. He's had to go through intensive physiotherapy for his left hand because when he was being stabbed, he sort of raised his left hand to protect himself. So that's where, all the lashes came, and he sort of lost, most of his muscles there. Um, and at that point, when, he was really at a low point, one of his friends sort of said, "You're going to write about this one day, Salman. One day you will." And he thought, "I never will." But here we are. But I think, more than anything else, it's a really, really sort of grim reminder that actions have consequences. And what we try to brush away as hate, sometimes online and sometimes offline, can have really deep and serious consequences for people. And we must at all times protect, preserve, and nurture the space for people to have dialogue, and to have a difference of opinion, and to hear that you may not agree with it, you're not bound to agree with it, but you have to have space to listen to it, because when you sort of foster this air of hate, it can have very damaging outcomes. So I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm, of course, a huge fan of his writing, but I was struck by the journey he made to this book. Manu, what's on your list?
The problem with having three extroverted people on a podcast is, they're all going to talk about something very academic and bookwormy, which is so. Mine is an older book, but something that only recently I've started sort of getting my teeth and mind into. This is Yuval Noah Harari's *Sapiens*, which is some book you would find on most bookshelves. Whether somebody has read it or not, they probably have it gifted to them. It's a I mean, found it such an ambitious book, right? And I won't spoil it, but I want to give enough of a teaser to people who are thinking of buying it, or at least taking it from the bookshelf to read it today. So it's so ambitious that it sort of charts the history of the world as we know it from the Stone Age to the present day. But the part that I've really enjoyed in this book is around religion, and how he characterizes religion. So Harari calls religion as a set of values based on a belief in a superhuman order, a set of values based on a belief in a superhuman order. And he tells us why religions would be successful, right? And he says the religions which are both universal in unifying people, and who are missionary, they take the cause out, like Islam or Buddhism, they would be more successful, and they would replace essentially religions which earlier were local and exclusive. So anything that's not inclusive and just kept within itself, it became it started getting outdated. And the other really interesting point in this book is he argues, and I mean it is now so apparent to me, that initially how the most prominent or prevalent religion was animism, and people believed plants and animals to be equal to humans, because we were praying to plants and animals and nature essentially. But after the agricultural revolution, when we started domesticating animals and we controlled plants, they go down in status, right? So people think less of them, and that is how religion sort of evolved into looking for something more superhuman in that sense. I find this book fascinating, and like I said, I've come to it in a later sort of part of my life, but I really want everybody to read this book, if not for what it says, at least to understand the ambition. If you're going to write a book, write about the entire history of the world. Don't limit yourself to like the last
Go big or go home.
4 months. Just write about 15, 20, 30,000 years if you can. But anyway.
Or in our case, last week for the podcast. No, mine
Where's your
is mine is
Yeah.
depressing. There is a Padma Shri who was awarded Padma Shri from Telangana. His name is Darshanam Mogulaya. Um, he's been in a family of this instrument, a traditional instrument called Kinnera, that traces back 5 generations in his family. He popularized it. Um, he has a number of singles that became really famous, but he happens to be a daily wage worker. And despite winning the Padma Shri, despite being so dedicated to his art form, at the age of 73, I found out today, he is back to working on a construction site. In the news report I read, one of his sons suffers from seizures, and for medicines alone, he needs about 7,000 rupees a month. my heart breaks about India sometimes. Like being an artist in India is not forgiving. Um, anyway, I'm looking for ways to get in touch with him, especially if one of our listeners um, has a way to get to him. Please let me know. I am also in touch with some of my music label friends to find a way to engage. Yeah, this is happening.
Can I ask how you read about this, Richard? Like, where did you
I
come?
forgot which reporter, but a reporter basically put a photo from a news, I think a Times of India story, and I read about him on the Times of India cutout.
Okay,
Anyway,
yeah.
that was my Have You Heard. I will. I want to thank you all for listening to us, for making it this far in the podcast. Thank you, Mitali and Manu, as always. If you want to give us feedback, please write to us at indiadialoguepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube at India Dialogue Podcast, on Twitter or X at TID underscore podcast. TID stands for the India Dialogue. Mitali is on Mitali1983. Manu is
No,
on.
that's Manu.
I was bound to mess it up at some point.
I'm the
PM.
41-year-old. Mitali is the 21-year-old.
I apologize. Mitali is on Mitali Live. Manu is on Manuraj1983. I am Ruchir at Ruchir underscore P. Thank you again for joining
We
us and see
record
you
on
all next
Friday.
week.
It's been a long week.
Thank you all. See you soon.